All right, today we are going to we're going to do lecture 3, which is all about connective tissue proper. So you've seen this slide before. We talked extensively about epithelial tissue. And today we are going to talk about connective tissue. But we're actually only going to talk about one type of connective tissue today, and that is called connective tissue proper. There are other types of connective tissue, including cartilage, bone, and blood, that we will study later in the semester. And there are many roles for connective tissue throughout the body. There are a few of them listed here. So connective tissue fills internal spaces, provides structural support, and also has the ability to store energy. Most connective tissue has a very diverse set of functions and also a very diverse morphology, meaning the way it looks, the form or the shape of it. So connective tissue can be a solid, it can be a liquid, and it can be somewhere in between. Connective tissue in general has a shared set of characteristics, and these are the 3 basic components shared by all connective tissue. So connective tissue has specialized cells. Some of the cells are creating the material seen in the connective tissue, while other cells come into the connective tissue to reside there. The second component is extracellular protein fibers. So what connective tissue is defined by is not so much by the cells, which is what epithelial tissue was defined by, but actually what is outside of those cells. Sorry, that's my dog. All of the material outside of the cells is called matrix. And matrix is comprised of 2 separate components. It is comprised of protein fibers, and there's different types of protein fibers that we will talk about. And it is comprised of something called ground substance. And ground substance is what the protein fibers are suspended or embedded in. And ground substance is made by specialized cells. So what defines connective tissue isn't the cells, but it is the matrix. So let's talk about the classification of connective tissue. So again, it is based entirely on the matrix and how the matrix is composed. So again, there's 3 different types of connective tissue. There's what's called connective tissue proper. All right, this has a matrix of fibers, and it is kind of described as like a maple syrup-like ground substance. So it's pretty viscous and thick, but it's still semi-liquid, okay? And then so we talked about that, and then there is something called fluid connective tissue, which is blood and lymph. So blood contains red blood cells and white blood cells, and it has a liquid ground substance. Plasma. And then the third type of connective tissue is the supporting connective tissue. And this has a matrix consisting of protein fibers in a gel, such as cartilage, or in a solid crystalline ground substance, which would be the case for bone. All connective tissue originates from the mesoderm. And remember, we talked about these layers in the last lecture and how the mesoderm comes to be. So that cells from the ectoderm start populating this middle layer, which then becomes the mesoderm. And the mesoderm is going to give rise to all of the connective tissue types. It's all going to be derived from mesoderm. So a lot of things are derived from mesoderm, if you remember. So muscle, bone, and various organs all come from the mesoderm. And the mesoderm consists of a cell type called mesenchymal stem cells. The early tissue that connective tissue comes from is called the mesenchyme. The mesenchyme consists of mesenchymal stem cells, but not a lot of fibers yet because it hasn't taken on its final job. It's the beginning substance in which you will construct the tissue from. It is a basic substance that will later be altered to make the various connective tissues. So this picture right here shows what mesenchyme looks like. So you can see the nuclei of individual cells, and they are embedded in a substance all around it, but with very few fibers. So if you remember, epithelial tissue was defined by its cellularity. But this is not the case with connective tissue. There's a huge amount of space between the cells. All right, so this is the key difference between connective tissue and epithelia. So connective tissue begins as mesenchyme. So what happens is you start to lay down some fibers and ground substance, and then the mesenchymal cells will begin to change. So mesenchymal cells will become a cell called a fibroblast. And then various signals will occur to tell the mesenchyme to become something else. All right, so this is how it originates, and then it will then become either something called loose connective tissue or dense connective tissue. So there are two categories of connective tissue proper: loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. So loose connective tissue still has a lot of space in and around the cells, all right, and in between the fibers. However, dense connective tissue, it does not mean that the cells are necessarily dense. The density actually comes from the amount of fibers you see here. So there is very little ground substance. So from this point on, we're going to talk about the different types of loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue, now that you have an understanding of how these connective tissues are derived. All right, so the last thing that we need to discuss before we actually look at connective tissue proper is we need to talk about the types of fibers that you're going to see when you're looking at the connective tissue. So first, let's talk about collagen fibers. So collagen fibers, they are the thickest of the fibers that you will see. They are somewhat flexible, but they are also the strongest. So they are what give ligaments and tendons their resilience and strength. So that's collagen fibers. Sometimes you will see elastic fibers. Elastic fibers are thinner than collagen. They have the ability to stretch. You will see that they also branch and that they can rejoin. So elastic fibers, you will find them in blood vessels because this will allow the vessels to stretch and relax. So based on where the location is of the connective tissue, you need it to have a specific function. And that's what you're going to get with these different types of fibers. The last type of fiber that I'll show you are called reticular fibers. These are thinner than collagen fibers, and they form kind of like a branching network or a mesh. And they are found in organs that have abundant spaces such as liver, lymph nodes, and spleen. So let's begin to talk about the two classifications of connective tissue. So as I mentioned, you can have loose connective tissue and dense connective tissue. So let's go over the three types of loose connective tissue. And this is what we will be doing in the lab. We will be looking at the different types of connective tissue proper under the microscope. All right, the first one is called areolar connective tissue. And it's always important to be able to recognize the type of connective tissue that you're looking at. So be able to name it if you see it. Be able to describe some of the features and or functions, and also, as always, be able to identify a location where you would find this particular connective tissue. So areolar connective tissue, and I'll show you a picture in a moment, is found surrounding blood vessels. It's found in nerve bundles, and it's found in muscles and organs. It's really predominant, and I'll show you that in the next slide. The second one is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, or fat, is found underneath the skin, around the heart, and padding around the joints. And then the third type of connective tissue that we're going to look at in loose connective tissue is called reticular tissue. And this is found in the kidney, lymph nodes, and spleen. So again, it's important to be able to identify each of these if you're shown it as a picture or under the microscope. And you need to be able to determine a location where you would find this. And then finally, some of the features, the types of fibers, the types of cells, etc. All right, so let's begin with areolar connective tissue. So here are a few of the locations as well. I defined some of the locations in the previous slide. Areolar connective tissue is found deep within the dermis of the skin. It's covered by the epithelium lining of the digestive tract. It covers the epithelial lining of the digestive tract. And it is found in various other places, such as muscles, around blood vessels, nerves, and joints, as I was talking about in the last slide. It has several functions. It mainly functions to cushion organs and to provide support, but it also allows for a little bit of movement. So this is a cartoon image on this side. So you can see that there's a lot of space here, but there are a lot of different fibers here. All right, so let me start by pointing out that the thicker fibers right here, those are the collagen fibers. Okay, you can see this is a histological image, so this is what you would see under the microscope. When you see these dark pink looking fibers, those are the collagen fibers. You can see various cell types within the areolar tissue. You can see mast cells, this is an immune cell. Macrophages, those are also immune cells. And then we talked about fibroblasts. We'll call that fibroblast. All right, so you can see the collagen fibers. There's also elastic fibers. So areolar tissue contains all three types of fibers. It contains collagen fibers, it contains elastic fibers, and it also contains reticular fibers. All right, so the elastic fibers are usually a lot thinner. You can see them here. Here's another one here. And you can see one here. So when you look under the microscope, you want to try and train your eyes to identify these types of fibers. And then I don't think the reticular fibers are labeled on this slide, but I have another slide, another image that I like to use that has all of these fibers labeled for you. So again, you can see these thick collagen fibers, okay? And then these thinner fibers here, I can use yellow might work. These are the elastic fibers. They tend to be thinner, okay? And then the one fiber that you couldn't see on the last image are the reticular fibers. And they're what's kind of pictured in this area here. They form kind of like a mesh network. And this gives the cells an area to kind of hold on to and sit in. So you'll often find these reticular fibers there. So you can see all the different types of fibers. You can see the different cell types, and you can see the ground substance. You can see that it is not, again, not defined by cellularity. There's not as many cells there as there are fibers and ground substance. The next type of connective tissue is called adipose tissue. Adipose tissue, let me change my color here, is so here are a couple of the locations of adipose tissue. So there is adipose tissue under deep in the skin. You will find it in certain areas of our body, such as our buttocks and our breasts. There's padding around the eyes and the kidneys. So make sure that you can identify an area in our bodies that contain adipose tissue. The function of adipose tissue is listed here. It provides padding and cushion and cushions. It helps with shock absorbance. It insulates, and it also is a great place to store energy. So this is an image of what skin looks like. Adipose is deep to the layers of skin. You can find it deep in skin. Here it's always pictured as kind of yellow, kind of ball-looking cells. These are called adipocytes, okay? So adipocytes or adipose cells, they contain a lot of fat within the cells. So what it ends up looking, they almost look like air bubbles when you're looking at it under histology, under the microscope, because there is so much fat located within the cell that it often pushes the nucleus off to the side. So you can see the nucleus, but there's so much adipose in the cell that it primarily takes up the entire cell, and it pushes all the organelles and the nucleus off to one side. So that's what you're seeing here. So sometimes you can see the nucleus, but again, it does look like air bubbles. Here's another one. So here's a cell. It's filled with adipose, and it pushes the nucleus off to the side. So again, this is a loose connective tissue. All right, it's dominated by adipocytes, and you can see that there is so much lipid and fat within the cell that it kind of pushes off the nucleus and the organelles off to one side. All right, and then the last type of loose connective tissue is called reticular tissue. So some of the locations are listed here. You can find reticular tissues in the liver, in the kidney, and in the spleen, in the lymph nodes, and also bone marrow. So again, it's always good to be able to know the location where you can find these types of connective tissue. I told you that reticular tissue is, so I should back up and say there are no fibers located in adipose, okay? And in reticular tissue, the one type of fiber you're gonna see are reticular fibers. And remember, they form a mesh network, so they provide a supporting framework for cells to sit there, okay? So this reticular tissue consists of an open framework of reticular fibers. You can see all of the fibers, and you'll be able to see them under the microscope as well. So here is an image. This is more of a cartoon image of reticular tissue. All right, now, let me show you one other image of reticular tissue before we move on to dense connective tissue. So this is another nice histology image showing you reticular tissue, showing you the reticular fibers forming the mesh network. This is an actual image of lymph node. So you're going to see some white blood cells located here. So again, this network acts as a supporting mesh in soft tissue such as liver, bone marrow, and the tissues and organs of the lymphatic system. So now we'll finish this lecture talking about dense connective tissue. And within dense connective tissue, we also have 3 different types. So the first one that we will take a look at is dense regular connective tissue. Then we have dense irregular connective tissue. And finally, we have dense elastic tissue. And again, if you remember from the slide I showed several images ago, it is called dense connective tissue because there are a lot of fibers. So you're going to see predominantly fibers in these images. So dense regular, we'll start there. Dense regular connective tissue contains a lot of collagen fibers. And some of the features of dense regular connective tissue is that there is hardly any ability to stretch. So this is found in ligaments and tendons where we don't want a lot of ability to stretch. The second category is dense irregular connective tissue. And this is found really throughout the entire body, okay? And it is found covering blood vessels. Oh, I spelled that wrong. The dermis of the skin, the outside covering of bone. It is basically the duct tape of our body. And what you will see, it's called irregular because the collagen fibers are actually running in all different directions. And I'll show you images next. And then the third, dense elastic, elastic as the name implies, has a lot of elastic fibers in it. So this type of connective tissue has the ability to stretch and then recoil back. So this is only found in 2 places. The walls of the aorta, which is the largest vessel of our heart. So there's a lot of blood pressure there, and that aorta needs to be able to stretch and then recoil back into place. And then there's also, which is probably the easier one to memorize in terms of a location, and then there's also a ligament that runs along the spine called the ligamentum flavum. And I will show you where that is and what the location, what it looks like, and that is made up of dense elastic connective tissue. So let's go ahead and take a look at all of these. So first, we'll start with dense regular connective tissue. And again, these figures come from your textbook, so if you need more explanation or need to review this material after the lecture or before this lecture, you can find all of these images in your book. So these images nicely outline the location and the functions of each of these types of connective tissue. So dense regular connective tissue is found between skeletal muscles and skeleton. So this is in the tendons, between bones, and helps to stabilize our organs. All right, so here is a cartoon image. You can see that it is predominantly made up of collagen fibers. They are running relatively close to one another in the same direction. These very strong collagen fibers help provide support and attachment for muscles and stabilize the positions of our bones. Okay, here's an actual histological image that we will look at under the microscope. You will be able to make out some of the cells. You can see the nuclei here, here, and here. And you can see all of the collagen fibers running really close to each other. And again, this is to help, this is going to provide a lot of support. Here's another image of dense, regular connective tissue. Again, you can see all of the fibers running in the same direction. This is going to help attach muscle to bone or muscle to muscle, and it is going to have a lot of strength to it so that if there is any kind of pulling force, it can withstand that. You can make out some of the nuclei of the fibroblasts as well. Here's yet another image. Then we'll move on to, this is dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, there should be a title up here. Dense, irregular connective tissue. So the important feature about dense, irregular connective tissue is that the collagen fibers are in an irregular arrangement. So you can see the collagen fibers kind of going in multiple directions rather than all in the same direction. Their function is to be able to withstand a lot of tension that is exerted in many directions. You can find them in the joints, organs, so capsules in organs and joints. You can also find it in the skin and places like the digestive tract. Here's another image showing you, it's just stained a different color, but you can see the collagen fibers kind of running in all different directions, indicating, so this should be the clue to indicate that this is dense, irregular connective tissue. So again, you need to be able to look at these images, be able to recognize what they are, talk about the types of fibers, and name a location. All right, this is dense, elastic. Oh, sorry. Dense, elastic connective tissue. For me, the telltale sign that you're looking at dense, elastic connective tissue is the ability to see all of these elastic fibers. And they kind of have like a squiggly line appearance to them. This type of connective tissue allows for stretch and recoil. So again, you can find it in the aorta. Okay, here. That is one place where you can find dense, elastic connective tissue. And it has this very, the appearance of it is very striking because you can see the elastic fibers throughout the connective tissue. Here's another image showing you all of these. You can see all of the elastic fibers. They kind of look like little squiggly lines. This is what you can find predominantly in the aorta. All right, that takes us through our lecture 3 where we've talked about connective tissue, and I look forward to seeing you all in lab.